Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Everything except your intelligence. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. We're coming to you, as always, from the studios of 91.7 KALW, San Francisco's oldest, coolest, most innovative public radio station.
Continuing conversations and feeble attempts to forgive each other for the various things we do that began on Philosopher's Corner down at Stanford's wonderful campus.
And continue on our wonderful blog, theblog.philosophytalk.org. John's already weighed in. Check it out.
Yes, hope you haven't read the blog yet, because if you'd read what I have to say, you probably would think, well, what's the point of listening to the program? That man has told us everything we need to know about forgiveness.
Not true. You overestimate John.
Well, forgive me.
Yeah, so tell me, what's forgiveness?
What's forgiveness? Well, I can tell you what it's not. Forgiving someone something isn't the same as excusing them, for example. Wouldn't you agree with that?
I guess so, yeah, because you excuse somebody for things they did accidentally or unintentionally. You trip and spill coffee all over me. You ask, excuse me, and I excuse you. I don't hold you accountable. But if you just took the coffee and poured it on me and intentionally, and you say, excuse me, I say, excuse you?
Excuse you?
But you could beg my forgiveness.
I could beg your forgiveness, probably without result, but I could do that. So there's a difference between excusing and forgiving, and asking, excuse me, and asking, forgive me. Forgiving is not condoning.
Right.
You can still think that what a person did to you was vile and still forgive them.
Right. So if to forgive somebody, I mean, it seems right to forgive somebody only if, right, you hold them responsible, they recognize their responsibility, and somehow you release them from something. I mean, you don't quite release them from responsibility, but you release them from having to do anything else or something. I'm not sure.
There's different elements of forgiveness. I mean, I think part of forgiveness is mainly a benefit for the forgiver. There's a lot of quotes about that around. I let go of my resentment. I let go of my desire for revenge. I live, without being consumed by thoughts about you. For that, you don't have to have changed. You don't have to have apologized. You don't even have to be alive.
Well,
so I'm not sure forgiving always requires this.
Well, that's true. But if I let go, I can imagine letting go of my resentment and all that, my anger. But if you haven't done anything, if you haven't reformed yourself, then my letting go it's like foolhardy. I'm like a dupe or something like that. So it seems like there has to be something on the side of the forgiven to which the letting go on the side of the forgiver is kind of some kind of response, it seems to me.
I don't know that if I agree with that. I think there's two different cases. One is I forgive you in the sense that I forgo any desire for revenge. That's what Bishop Butler says forgiveness is. But I don't try to reconcile with you. I don't try to bring you into my life again. I'm very careful not to give you a chance to do the thing again. The other thing is where you've really changed, and I'm willing to kind of start over.
Well, I do think there's a difference, right, between forgiving as a preparatory to reconciliation and forgiving as just breaking off, a relationship, as preparatory to just breaking off a relationship. Those are complicated things, But, the act of forgiving, the process of forgiving, of getting your head into the ready to forgive somebody, that can be pretty wrenching. That can be pretty wrenching stuff.
It can be a long process.
Yeah, it can. And our roving philosophical reporter, Amy Standen, went out and talked to somebody who had to go through a wrenching process of forgiveness.
Well, on New Year's Eve, my husband and I did the very same thing we had done every year.
This is Katie Hutchison. She lives on Victoria Island in Canada.
We had some very close friends that would make the drive out of Vancouver to the small community we were living in to spend the weekend with us. And we'd spend hours in the kitchen making some amazing food to share with one another. And tucked our kids into bed. We're sitting around the table after that meal, drinking a bottle of wine, really reflecting on how lucky we were. We were at such a nice place in our lives.
Around 10:30, Katie, her husband Bob, and their friends learned that a party was going on at the home of a close friend who had left his teenage son alone for the holiday. When Bob called and asked to speak to the boy, he was told that he wasn't there. Bob and two others went to see if everything was okay.
And they literally put on their coats, cracked open a beer, because they were just walking to the end of our street, walked out into the snow, and I stood at the top of my stairs watching them walk down the road, laughing and talking, and I called after them to hurry back, and Bob never came back. Bob did what I can just imagine him doing. He went straight upstairs to the master bedroom. He would have wanted to have made sure there was no one partying in our friend's personal space. And when he got to the top of the stairs into the master suite, the first person he encountered was a large young man, over 6 feet tall, who took exception to the fact that Bob had shown up. But instead of having much of a conversation, he just threw a punch, and he knocked my husband out. And then another young man came up to Bob, a young man by the name of Ryan Aldridge. He was just as angry as the other guy, and so he went up to Bob's unconscious body and delivered what he later described to the police as 4 soccer-type kicks to my husband's head. And one of those kicks severed an artery that supplied blood to the brain. And Bob died of a massive brain hemorrhage on our friend's bedroom floor.
4 years went by without an arrest. It was what Katie calls a code of silence. No one from the party would tell the police what happened. Katie moved her 2 young children to another town, eventually remarried, and waited.
When the police were ready to make the arrest, they phoned me, and they said, "We're there. We've got the information. Next Friday, we're going to make the arrest." And I said, "Great. I really appreciate having the heads up so I can wrap my mind around it and prepare myself and my family. And I'd also like to be there when you do it." And there was an enormous silence on the end of the line from the police. And they said, "What do you mean, you want to meet him?" And I said, "Well, of course I do." And I don't think they understood that initially. And I had to say that I didn't really think seeing Ryan eventually get taken out of some courtroom in handcuffs was going to make me feel much better. What was really going to make me feel better was to sit down with him face-to-face and talk about the enormous impact that Bob's death had had on me and on my children, find out what on earth had been going on in his life to make it possible, and then decide between the two of us what we could do to ensure it didn't happen again.
After Katie told Ryan about her husband and what kind of person he had been, Ryan confessed and eventually pled guilty and went to prison. Over the years, Katie has developed a relationship with Ryan and his family. She forgave him, and he says that her forgiveness is what saved his life.
Forgiveness means fully experiencing the pain and then understanding that the impact and the harm has had an effect on all sides of the harm, and then not allowing yourself to be defined by that. Forgiveness really was what enabled me to see Bob's death as not just being a tragic ending, but possibly the creation of some kind of hopeful beginning. Forgiveness said nothing less about how I felt about Bob or how profoundly his murder affected me, but it completes the circle. And I know many other victims who are on the other side of a situation where the perpetrator isn't repentant and doesn't get it. But that doesn't mean that the victim can't forgive, because the forgiveness was for me. It was for my children. I extended it to Ryan, but he happened to be there to accept it. But I know in many situations people aren't, but I don't believe that the forgiveness should be dependent upon that. I mean, number one, the forgiveness was for me. Stuff is going to happen in our lives. No doubt stuff will happen. And you have a choice about how you react. And your reaction shapes what happens next. And forgiveness will set you free.
Katie Hutchison is the author of Walking After Midnight, due out from Raincoast Publishing in the fall of 2006. For Philosophy Talk, this is Amy Standen.
Thanks, Amy, for that moving and profound and in some ways, I think, disturbing piece. Here's a case of forgiveness that does seem to have helped the forgiver, but also seems to have helped the forgiven. And it ties in with what Ken and I were talking about earlier about just exactly who is forgiveness for.
Yeah. It seems she seems to be arguing it's for both, but you can have the benefit for one even if you don't have the benefit for the other. But you know what? Why don't we bring our guest on to help us clear this up, because he's thought about this a lot harder than you and I have, John. And our guest today is Professor Charles Griswold from he's a professor of philosophy and chairman of the department, just like me, down at Stanford, but he's over at Boston University. He is a fellow this year at the Stanford Humanities Center. He's working on a book in progress about sympathy and forgiveness. Charles, welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Hi, Charles. Welcome to Philosophy Talk. So,
Hi, John.
Let's pick up on this theme that came out in Ken and my discussion, and also in our roving philosophical reporters interview with Katie. Who is forgiveness for, and what does it require of the person who's forgiven? Anything? or is it mainly just a process for the forgiver that says, I'm letting go and my life will be better? And how do you think about it after a year of pondering forgiveness and sympathy at the Humanities Center?
Well, it's complicated, but I will say that, first of all, forgiveness is not just a psychological process. It's not just, or not even primarily therapy. Forgiveness really does have conditions, and you can be mistaken in forgiving somebody. You can be mistaken in not forgiving somebody. Both, and ideally anyways, the injured person and the offender have to meet certain criteria if forgiveness is really to come into being in the full sense of the term.
So in your view, you really can't forgive the dead, for example?
Well, that you can, I think, but that becomes a sort of a messier case than what you might think of as the simplest or the ideal case.
So tell us about what you think is the standard case of forgiveness and what the relationship is between the forgiver and the forgiven. I mean, you seem to think there's some kind of requirements on the forgiven in order for the act of forgiveness to be kind of morally appropriate or something like that.
At least paradigmatically.
Paradigmatically, or in the ideal case, I think in the lead story, Katie put this very, very powerfully when she spoke about the offender experiencing the injured person's pain. And I think that is one of the things the injured person has to do, is to show that he or she really has entered into the situation of the person that he injured and those who are intimately concerned with that person, and address that. And part of contrition, I think, is to enter sympathetically that way, compassionately, look at it from the standpoint of the person you did the harm to, take responsibility for it so that you're not trying to let yourself off the moral hook, show that you'll change your ways, and that you'll make amends, that you're not the same person. Of course, you have to repudiate what you did as well. So there's a number of conditions of that sort that in this ideal or paradigmatic case, the injurer or the offender should meet
if somebody has
to qualify.
So if somebody doesn't have the requisite contrition, if they haven't disowned the act, if they don't sympathetically engage with what they did to their victim, you say, well, then forgiveness can't happen, is wrong, is morally inappropriate? I mean, what's...
It all depends on the particulars. For example, to go back to your earlier case of an offender who is dead and can't take any of the steps, is such a person unforgivable for that reason alone? Not necessarily, if you could plausibly, as it were, construct a scenario under which that person would have come to you and would have done the following. Maybe there's enough data in the person's biography that you can come to think that.
But your view really is controversial in the sense that there is a picture of forgiveness that says, well, forgiveness is mainly something we do with people that are unrepentant. In Christian, say, in the book of Matthew, how many times do I have to forgive him, Lord? Well, 7 times 70. Nothing about contrition. Now, I'm not suggesting it's basically a religious notion, but isn't there an importance? Bishop Butler, the great person who I know you admire, great philosopher we both admire, contemporary of Hume's, thought that forgiveness was basically giving up the right of revenge or desire for revenge, but that didn't require anything on the part of the forgiven. So there's a controversy, right? I mean, there's two views here, and you're plumping for one rather than the other.
Yes, that's absolutely right. I'm taking a position. I mean, a lot of people think forgiveness, as I said at the beginning, is just a psychological state, and that if you don't feel angry anymore, you have forgiven the person. I submit that that's a mistake also. For example, let's say that you take a special drug, right, that sort of obliterates your memory of what happened, except in the most general details. And then the person who did the injury to you comes to you and says, I feel really guilty. I would like to be forgiven. You say, forgiven? I can barely remember what you did. Whatever. Okay, you're forgiven. Is that forgiveness?
Well, I'm going to let that question.
I don't think so.
I'm going to let that question hang in the air, and we can take it up and challenge you a little bit after a break. You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Our guest is Charles Griswold, professor of philosophy and chairman of the philosophy department at Boston University. We've been trying to get clear just what forgiveness is, how it differs, say, from letting somebody off the hook, excusing them. We haven't asked the question, but we soon will, whether forgiveness can be deserved or whether it must be a freely given gift.
Coming up, we're going to focus more on the psychology of forgiveness. How do you get to the point where you can forgive? Does forgiveness do more for the forgiver or the forgiven? Can you forgive someone yet never want to see them again?
We'll take your calls after the break. Philosophy Talk will be right back.
Please accept my apology, but love was blind, and I was too blind to see.
Patsy Cline with I'm Sorry. Patsy Cline, one of my all-time favorites. I don't miss the Bee Gees, last week's group du jour. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. We're discussing forgiveness. Join us. Have you ever been surprised by your own ability or inability to forgive? Have you ever sought forgiveness from another? When you did you think you deserved forgiveness? The number is 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134.
Outside the Bay Area, you can call us toll-free, 1-800-525-9917. That's 1-800-525-9917. Finally, you can email us at comments@philosophytalk.org. Our guest is Charles Griswold. He teaches philosophy at Boston University. He's the author of Adam Smith and the Virtues of Enlightenment, and he's deep in the process of writing what's going to be an exciting new book on sympathy and forgiveness.
And if it's not exciting, you'll have to forgive John for that hyperbole.
He's already forgiven.
Yeah, but Charles, I'm going to go back to what we're talking about. I think I tend to side with you and against John. It seems to me that unless there's contrition of the sort that you claim is necessary, then an act of forgiveness is an act of folly. You can let go of your anger for your own benefit, but letting go of your own anger doesn't let the other person off the hook in a certain way, in the same sense that an act of forgiving does. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. In that thought experiment, I suggested that sort of imaginary example of, forgetting rather than forgiving, I think will persuade most people that there are some criteria you have to meet for forgiveness to really take place. You can't just utter the word and make it happen just by uttering the word.
Yeah, but there's a little bit of room between these two extremes. I admit that taking a drug so you forget isn't the same as forgiving. But so many cases of forgiveness involve, say, forgiving your parents when you get older and realize what their life was like and they don't change. And maybe if you pointed out to them the things you think they're forgiving you for, they would say, "What? That's ridiculous." Still, it seems to me it can be sincere and real forgiveness. I still am a little more inclined toward Bishop Butler's, as you say, more psychological view. It doesn't say that there don't have to be a lot of conditions. I don't think he would count taking a drug and forgetting as the same as forgiveness. But I don't see why the paradigm involves this contrition.
Let me see if I can press John's. I think I see a point in John's remarks. I wonder what you think about this. Suppose that you and I are in some relationship and you see yourself wronged by me in a way that I don't see it, that I've wronged, like the parent and the child, right? Mm-hmm. The child spends all this time, resenting, angry at her parents or his parents for what the parents did. And the parents were just being, parents. That's what parents do. And the child grows up and says, "Oh, that's what parents do. I forgive my parents for," it sounds like, even though there's no wrong by their lights to acknowledge, can't that be a kind of forgiveness? I think John's wondering something like that.
Well, wouldn't you say that that's actually more like excusing them, or you might even say pardoning, to stretch that word a bit, than forgiving? Let's say that you start to tell the story about your parents, how they came to be the sort of people that they are, the sequence of events that led them to treat you the way that they did in this wrongful way. So you tell this whole narrative, and as a result, you feel you've now understood something about them that you didn't understand before, and you can let go of that anger that you felt for a while. Is that really forgiveness? I think I would be more like excusing and letting go of the anger. It's like not holding them responsible any longer for the bad things that they did to you.
Yeah. What do you think about that, John? Does that answer you?
No, I don't think it's necessarily not holding them responsible. You can still hold them responsible, but I don't know. Maybe it's just, as people like to say, a semantic matter. But there is this important psychological process. We've got a couple of emails here I'll throw into the hopper. Christopher Hurst says, "I disagree with the guest. Forgiveness is a complete psychological process. Whether forgiveness works is whether people, of course, remember the action that spawned anger, sympathy, or otherwise. Usually people are not apt to forget a big matter, such as the Holocaust. Well, that's the truth. While a person who accidentally called a guy ma'am mayhap will not forget that mistake. The person for whom the mistake was made might forget, though, in which case forgiveness can be an issue. So I guess he's on my side. I'm not too sure. Now, I just want to mention, Rachel Howard points out a chapter of Marguerite's book, The Ethics of Memory, which she says has a fascinating final chapter on forgiving and forgetting. She talks a little bit about that, but maybe we can get you to talk a little bit about Marguerite, if that's one of the things in your tenure here at the Stanford Humanities Center you've had time to pore over.
Actually, I have read it. In fact, he's coming to Stanford next week to give some talks. So
well, very timely.
We can ask him if I got this right. But he's really talking about notions of forgiveness in a theological context, which you mentioned earlier, John. And this is really very different. There's a whole set of other issues that come up when you talk about God's forgiveness, or may I add, forgiving God, which has been an issue in some contexts as well. I'm thinking of this really in a secular context. Marguerite has these very interesting discussions of, the Hebrew Scripture and so forth on this. To go back to the first email about this being a psychological point, look, what if I got up and I said, I published an ad in the New York Times tomorrow morning and said, I hereby forgive all of the wrongs that the Nazis did to the victims of the Holocaust.
Well, you're not in a position to do that.
Exactly. There have to be certain criteria.
Well,
you can't just utter it and make it happen, and I might feel a lot better about it all.
Well, but I think there's
That's
two different issues
psychological.
there. One is it merely what philosophers call a performative? You say it, you did it. Like if this young lady, instead of running away from her betrothed, had stood up there and said, I do, with all the same mental reservations that drove her to run away, she would be now married, no matter what was going on in her mind. Well, forgiveness can't be like that. Moreover, once she ran away, her father couldn't stand up for her and say, I hereby announce that she does.
Right.
You've got to be the person who's in a position to forgive, and it's got there are conditions on your psychology. But the question is contrition on the other part even part of the paradigm? That's what I'm a little dubious about.
I'm not sure. Let me remind our callers, we're talking about forgiveness. We want to know what you think about this, about your own capacity to forgive, your own experience with either being forgiven or having to bring yourself to forgive. Join our discussion by calling 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134. If you're outside the Bay Area, you can dial 1-800-525-9917. So, Charles, okay. So we've got a big debate between you and John, and I'm kind of on the sideline. And I think I'm more on your side. That contrition on the part of the forgiven is a requisite to make forgiving not just possible, but appropriate, I think, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, it seems somehow inappropriate. But let me ask you another thing about related to this.
Mm-hmm.
People ask your forgiveness or beg your forgiveness. They don't demand your forgiveness. And so that makes it seem as though forgiveness is the kind of thing that can only be freely given by the forgiver, right? And can't be quite deserved by the forgiven. I mean, and that's a little bit connected with this contrition thing, a little bit. But what do you think about that? Can forgiveness be something that's deserved by the forgiven, such that the forgiver is required to forgive? But if that's so, why do we only ask for forgiveness or beg forgiveness and not demand it?
Yeah, that is a very interesting and very difficult question. So
that's the only kind we have.
I know, that's all. I'll take a stab at it, and you'll shoot me down rightly right away. But what I want to say is that there are conditions under which you should forgive or should not forgive, and that language is meaningful language. Take an analogy with gratitude, right? There are conditions under which you should be grateful, conditions under which you can be blamed for not being grateful. So I want to be able to use the language of it's being praiseworthy or admirable that you did or you didn't, depending on the circumstances. But I also don't want to say that you can be coerced into forgiving or alternatively not forgiving. It's not something for which you can be punished. It has to be free in that sense, as in the case of gratitude. But that doesn't mean it's arbitrary.
Kate in Berkeley has something to add to the conversation. Hi, are you on the line, Kate?
Hi, yeah, I'm here. I was thinking about another philosophical construct around forgiveness, which comes from Buddhism, and I thought might be helpful to the conversation. Buddhism has a great deal of emphasis on forgiveness as part of a path to enlightenment, enlightenment being seeing things as they are, seeing the truth. And from a Buddhist perspective, that has to do with the laws of cause and conditions, which means seeing the world as a series of causes and effects, such that when you do Buddhist forgiveness practice, you start out by acknowledging that you have knowingly and unknowingly harmed others and harm yourself. And you forgive yourself, and you try to forgive yourself, and then you also try to forgive others following. The basis is actually identifying with other people who have harmed and seeing the ways that you harm as well.
Kate, there's a lot of traditions like Stoicism and maybe the Greeks, and I would have put Buddhism in this category, where forgiveness really isn't an issue, because if you're really into it, you're sort of invulnerable to the sort of thing that us vulnerable people like me feel we constantly have to forgive others for. I mean, what do you think about that, Charles?
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it, that there have been cultures and intellectual traditions in which forgiveness is known, the word is there, the idea is floating around, but they don't think it's a virtue. It's not a praiseworthy thing to do. It sounds as though in the Buddhist case, it is a valued trait, a moral trait. But like you said, if you look at the Greek philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, the Stoics, the Epicureans, greatest minds ever, in the Western tradition, they don't think it's something that a noble person would do.
Right, but right, they do say that, and you're right. I mean, in your manuscript, there's a lot of stuff about that. But here's we're hungry.
Yeah,
we finite, fallible people.
Yeah, that's us.
We are hungry for forgiveness.
Speak for yourself. I'm above it all. I'm involved.
You're not part of us.
I want to shift this. We've been talking about the ethics a little bit, and what forgiveness is. I want to shift this just a little bit to the psychology. What is it that forgiveness does for me if I'm seeking forgiveness? And what do I? We've talked a little bit about what it does for the forgiver, but tell me what it does, and what does it do for our relationship? On your way of thinking about this thing.
Yeah, well, I think for the person who's seeking forgiveness, it's a matter of alleviating guilt and being readmitted to, if you could use this phrase, the moral community, the community of humankind. You are allowed back in the gates, as it were. Whereas, as we were saying, for the person doing the forgiving, I think it's primarily a matter of letting go of resentment, of moral hatred. What does it do for us? I think that depends. I'm not one of these people who thinks that forgiveness, necessarily reconciles you, because you may not have even known each other before. It doesn't make you best friends. It doesn't mean, as actually was evident in the opening story, it doesn't mean that you're off the hook legally. You may still be sitting in jail, serve out, your punishment, but still be forgiven. It may be that we never talk to each other. At a minimum, it means that we don't interfere with each other.
But it does sound like you think that the big benefit, at least to the forgiven, is ending a kind of moral exile, right? And the reason I ask and don't demand forgiveness is, if I'm a moral exile, I can't demand to be let back into the gates. I say, please let me back into the gates. And you, by granting forgiveness, let me back into the gates of the moral community.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing, I guess. If I'm prepared, if I deserve to be back in there.
Well, that's the big if, and the question is, what would make it such that you do deserve to be back in there?
Yeah.
But we have to assume it's a good thing to be in the moral community.
Sean in Petaluma's on the line. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Sean.
Hi, I just want to make a comment about forgiveness without contrition.
Okay, go ahead.
It seems to me that a person who forgives while the party that offended is not contrite, that would be absolution. So it would be absolving the other person.
I see.
And I think that there's a lot of historical precedents for that. For example, in the dirty wars of Argentina and Chile, afterwards, nobody was really brought to trial. Nothing was ever resolved. There was just an absolution of the crimes.
Thanks, Sean. Summer in San Francisco. Welcome to Philosophy Talk. Summer.
Hi, I just wanted to ask you guys what you think about the notion of forgiving ourselves, and if that's possible, given everything that needs to go into forgiving someone.
Oh, that's a very good question, Summer. Richard in San Francisco. What's your question or comment, Richard?
What's my comment?
Yeah.
My question is, what's missing in this scenario? Something occurred to me recently where a very hurtful series of things was said to me in a volunteer situation, and the volunteer group was part of a church. And I understand what this other person meant to say. I understand why she said it, and I sort of rack that up to her immaturity, perhaps, or something like that. and I, in my own mind, forgive her. But I'm having a hard time letting go of this thing, and I'm wondering, what's the missing piece?
Thanks. So, Charles, we got lots of good questions there. We got wondering, isn't forgiveness, as it were, without contrition, absolution, right? And then there was Summer's question about
forgiving yourself.
Forgiving the self.
Yeah.
And then this last question about what was missing in this. Can you want to take whichever one you want to address it?
Oh, these are great questions. Yeah. Well, let's take the self-forgiveness, since I think that's on a lot of people's minds. You know, you could forgive yourself for different kinds of things, right? I mean, you could forgive yourself for an injury you did to somebody else. And that, I think, is dimly viewed because it's their right to forgive you, not your right to forgive yourself for what you did to them. But, of course, you harm yourself in harming someone else, right? So if you do harm to someone else, you've also debased yourself. And there's a harm that you've done to yourself. Furthermore, you could simply harm yourself by, in some sense, abusing yourself or what have you without harming anybody else directly. And self-forgiveness would arise then, too. It's full of interesting puzzles, however, and I think this is why the caller raised the question.
Self-forgiveness, does that require contrition in the same way in your view?
Yes.
Contrition to yourself?
You have to, well, okay, so I said this is a complicated case. You know, we talk about forgiveness as giving up resentment, but we don't normally talk about resenting ourselves.
Right.
But we do talk about hating ourselves, injuring ourselves, punishing ourselves, telling the truth to ourselves, taking responsibility for what we did to ourselves and taking it to ourselves. So a lot of the factors actually do fit in, but not all of them.
Charles, I want to get your reaction to what I took to be an idea of Bishop Butler's. Now,
Okay.
I must say, I took it to be an idea of Bishop Butler's from an exposition of his view that I read in a draft chapter of yours. I didn't go back and reread.
You can rely on that.
I didn't go back and reread his 17 sermons. But that's the idea of that something connected with forgiveness is getting the me out of it. That is to say, someone does something to me, and it's the same sort of thing they might do to other people. And if they did to other people, I would regard it as reprehensible. But the emotion wouldn't be there. But when they do it to me, there's a surplus of emotion. So I can't be objective or disinterested about it. And he seemed to think that at least a large part of forgiveness was taking the thing that had happened to you and put it in this objective light, so that all the feelings that were based on the kind of subject, the fact that it happened to you, were separated. And it seems to me this would apply fairly well to self-forgiveness, too, because you just see yourself as no worse than anybody else who did these things. Excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah, the capacity for self-delusion is tremendous, isn't it? You feel resentment, someone's harmed you. Have you noticed that your resentment grows and grows and grows, gets bigger and bigger, pictures, all kinds of revenge that you're going to take, and gets really way out of proportion really quickly? And this is one of the abuses of resentment that we have to correct. And this is another reason why it's not just a psychological process. There's also a correct and incorrect way to feel what happened.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. Our guest is Charles Griswold. We've been talking about the ways in which forgiveness can affect the forgiver, the forgiven, the relationship between the two, self-forgiveness.
Coming up, we're going to ask whether forgiveness is always a virtue or if there are wrongs that can never be forgiven. And we'll take more of your calls and emails as well.
Philosophy Talk. We'll be right back.
Don Henley in the Heart of the Matter. Great stuff. I'm John Perry. He's being eaten up inside. I'm just on the radio. This is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm Ken Taylor. We're talking about forgiveness. Join us by calling 415-841-4134. That's 415-841-4134.
Yeah, and we've paid a lot of money for this toll-free line, 1-800-525-9917. You people over in Lithuania, Georgia, you people all around the world listening to Philosophy Talk, you're not taking advantage of it. 1-800-525-9917. Don't let the San Franciscans have the whole show to themselves. Or email us, comments at philosophytalk.org.
Charles, Richard, our caller in the last segment, was being eaten up. His inability to let go. That Don Henley song talked about being eaten up inside. we didn't get back to Richard's question. Help Richard out.
Yeah, that's an experience that all of us have. Where your reason has told you that the conditions have been met. You've tried to view the person who hurt you in a different light. You really think you should forgive, and your anger goes down, but it doesn't go away. It lingers and it gnaws away at you. I think at this point it really is psychological. I'm not sure that philosophy has much more to say, except that you need to make a commitment to keep trying over time. And this may involve everything sort of meditating on it, talking to the person, seeing a therapist, whatever it takes.
But this psychological thing, I think that's really important. Whether I can get myself to the act of forgiving someone.
Yeah.
You can make there's a distinction, I think. I mean, there's some acts that seem to me I could not forgive.
Yeah.
Now, I wonder if that's just a fact about me, or if there are objectively unforgivable acts. Some acts that, maybe a saint or a fool could forgive. But saints are, we're not saints, and hopefully we're not fools, but a normal, intact person, it's just, they're unforgivable, objectively unforgivable. Or is that just, my psychology that I think there are such things?
Well, I think it's something between the two. I'm not prepared to say that there are such things that are unforgivable. I'm also not prepared to say that everything is absolutely forgivable. Philosophers have argued on both sides of this with, great heated, a lot of heated discussion on both sides of this. I guess my view is that, Ken, at the end of the day, if you as the injured person, if it's the case that you as the injured person can't be humanly expected to forgive in the sense of letting go of that resentment, then the person who did you the harm is unforgiven. Is the person unforgivable? Not necessarily. Maybe with more time, more effort, more reflection, things will change on that score.
We have a caller in the line, Anna in Berkeley. I think you're right on a point like this. Welcome to Philosophy Talk, Anna.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I was a rape crisis counselor for many years, and I had a lot of clients who had been sexually abused as children, sometimes by members of their own families or by people outside the family. And for some survivors of sexual abuse, it's really, really important for them to forgive their perpetrator. And for others, it's very, very important that they never forgive them. And it seemed to me that it was a combination in terms of, it touches on several points you've been talking about. Here is something that might be in your category. Is it ever possible to forgive your grandfather for sexually molesting you for many years? For some people it is, and for some people it's clearly in the category of that is unforgivable. And it's equally important for them to frame it in different ways.
And I want to get your reaction to something I read. It was an article in Psychology Today, and it was about forgiveness and sexual abuse. And it said that if you divide forgiveness up into kind of giving up the idea of revenge, letting go of the resentment, and reconciliation, that the first two are a pretty good idea for the victims of abuse, but the third one often is not. Is that square with your experience?
That does frequently square with my experience, and we always wanted to allow survivors of sexual abuse to make decisions on their own about how they were going to handle the rest of their lives and the way they felt about it emotionally. And I think it's really okay not to forgive. And in most cases, it's probably a good idea not to reconcile. I think that the majority of the time, it's a good idea not to reconcile. And the majority of the time, that's not an option.
Yeah. Anna, thank you. You raised lots of interesting questions. Charles, so Anna seems to be suggesting that for some people, some things are forgivable. For other people, those very things are unforgivable. And that the category of the unforgivable is really just tied to the psychology of the victim, right? It just depends on who you are and where you are in your life. And I mean, do you agree with that, or
not quite the way it's formulated? No, because that again makes it subjective. I'm not questioning the therapeutic wisdom of moving past the anger, or perhaps not moving past it, depending on the situation, or reconciling or not. That I'd leave aside. But whether it's forgiveness or not is another question. And I again want to say that there are certain conditions that should at least ideally be fulfilled. But the problem is that even sometimes when they are fulfilled fully and ideally, the level of the injury can be so great that it is not humanly possible to forgive in the sense of let go of the rest of that resentment. So since you can't be asked to do something which is impossible morally, I think in such a case then one can say that the person is unforgiven.
I need to ask someone's forgiveness right now, and that's Patsy Cline and Pierrette. That was not Patsy Cline, according to Perrette, and I think she's right. I think as she does. It was Teresa Brewer.
Well, we'll have to take that up with our producers.
And when I heard it, I thought, that doesn't sound quite like Patsy Cline, but that song is so identified in my mind, that's who I said it was. So I'm sorry. I can't sing it, but I beg your forgiveness.
Well, we're glad. If you sung it, we'd have to ask you. You need to be forgiven for that. Amanda in San Francisco, welcome to Philosophy Talk, Amanda.
Hi. Yeah, I wanted to just mention I've had a lot of experience with a situation with a church in San Francisco where it seems that there's a purveyance of everybody needs to forgive everybody for no matter what. And the situation of that is that there seems to be sometimes a pattern of behavior that continues to go on, and then when I say, look, I just want certain people to try to meet me halfway so we can try to work this thing out, that nobody's perfect, let's try to meet each other halfway, it seems like nobody really wants to try to do that. And
there is this other side of contrition, which is unwanted forgiveness. Thank you, but I don't need your forgiveness because I did anything wrong to you, bub. And I've had that feeling, I must admit.
Yeah, it's a matter of like, well, okay, and then I forgive them, and then they continue on with the same behavior as if they don't really care to change. So
yeah, Amanda, thank you, Charles. So look, that goes back to something. The person who is in the position. This goes back to this free gift thing, which I guess you don't quite accept. But the person who offers forgiveness isn't putting him or herself in a morally superior position, right? And the person who asks for forgiveness is putting him or herself in a morally inferior position. I guess that's right. It should be. But if I offer you forgiveness for something that you think is wrong, you didn't do wrong, that's presupposing you're morally inferior to me, and I can reject that kind of in a huff, and now demand from you that you seek forgiveness from me for the thing you just did.
Well, if you forgive me for something that I didn't do, as you and John were saying earlier, that's just to say that, in order for forgiveness to really work, right, to really be forgiveness, you have to be forgiving the right person for what they really did. So that's another condition. It's a kind of a truth condition.
Well, what if I did it, but I just don't take it to be wrong, and you do?
Well, then we have an argument about what is wrong, but I don't see how I can forgive you if you won't even admit that what you did was wrong, if you're at that level.
Let me go back to the theme of this part of the show and just ask you something. Okay. Now, when we're talking about whether there are acts that shouldn't be forgiven, well, how about these moral monsters like Hitler or Jeffrey Dahmer? Do you put those in a different category, or how do you think about people who just do acts that it's just inconceivable that you could even begin to forgive them for?
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you that I'm not in favor of the moral monster language. It's very, very common, but it's a way of too easily objectifying and reifying and demonizing the other. I think we shouldn't use that kind of language. And it also obscures something, by the way, which is terrifying, which is a lot of people who do very terrible things, like this man Eugene de Kock, who was one of the chief torturers for the South African regime and who's in jail right now in South Africa, and who, by the way, has been forgiven by widows of some of his victims. These are not monsters. Unfortunately, they're recognizable humans who exercise human agency in the way that many of us does. They plan their deeds. They have families often. They have a religion. They're not. The horrible thing is that they're actually not monsters.
Theme of Hannah Arendt.
Yes, as an Eichmann case.
But okay, I see. I take your point. But still, I wonder if there might not be a category of unforgivable acts that I am not in a position to forgive. Maybe somebody else can. Maybe you can be admitted back into the broader moral community, but you can't be admitted back into my life in the way that forgiveness suggests. So that, a betrayal by a certain kind of betrayal by my spouse. I mean, she may not be a moral monster, but she has so broken the relationship between us that I could never appropriately forgive her. Maybe you guys can. You can. But I mean,
well, I think
so you don't have to be a monster to have committed an unforgivable act.
No, that's what I'm saying. Precisely not. And furthermore, there's cases in which you can forgive, say, your spouse for whatever, and you actually cannot resume.
Let's hear from Diane in Fremont. Hi, Diane.
Hello. I haven't heard the term trust, or I don't think I've heard you use the word acceptance either. And I'm wondering if we can accept a wrong that's done us without necessarily forgiving it, and thereby get through the resentment or whatever feelings we have about it. And the other question is, can we forgive someone a betrayal if we don't trust them not to do the same thing again?
Those are excellent questions.
Beautiful.
Excellent questions. Matthew in San Francisco.
Hi, how you doing?
Okay. What's your comment or question? We're getting toward the end, so be a little brief, okay?
Okay. I was thinking, for me, forgiveness is more than just letting go. It also involves having some understanding about why the other person did what they did and also how that made me feel, and then also having the truth about it. So I think it's more than just letting go. It's also having truth and understanding mixed in with that.
I think that's an excellent point, Matthew. Thanks a lot. Chris in Maryland, who's taking advantage of the 1-800 number. Chris, welcome to Philosophy Talk. You there, Chris?
Oh, yes, I am.
Go.
Yes, I was wondering if the church is addicted to the biological and psychological aspect of forgiveness.
The church is addicted to the biological and psychological aspect. Interesting, deep, and a little bit impenetrable question.
Thanks, Chris. Charles, I'll give you one last chance to comment on whatever you want to comment on.
Okay, yeah, those are great points. Yes, you can accept but not forgive. I think that's true. Is trust part of it? It sure is, because you have to trust that the people will carry forward their commitment to change. There are other ideals in the background, too. Growth and renewal are two other ideals that I think you're committed to if you think forgiveness is an important virtue. Do you need truth? Yes, this is all about truth, both at the interpersonal level and the level that we didn't talk about, the political level.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose the biology of forgiveness might have to do with original sin, but we're going to have to leave that for a different show.
Next time.
Yeah. Our guest has been Professor Charles Griswold, Professor of Philosophy and Chairman of the Philosophy Department at Boston University, author of Adam Smith and the Virtues of Enlightenment, and working on a book on sympathy and forgiveness. Charles, thanks so much for joining us.
It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Charles, and also thank you to the callers who got in, the callers who didn't get in, the emailers who got read, and the emailers we didn't have a chance to read.
Yeah, we prompted a whole lot of discussion, and you want to read... You want to continue this discussion, go to our blog, right? But, John, how do you think about this today? Have you changed your mind? You started out not really believing Charles's line, I think.
Oh, well, I mean, I don't want to say it's all an act, but we have to kind of freeze our positions here to get discussion going. Charles, in his books, talks about, I believe, the whole idea, Wittgenstein's idea of family resemblance between closely allied concepts, and the same name seems to be given to them all. I think the important thing for a philosopher to do is to make the distinctions. There is this subjective concept of forgiveness. It's the one, I guess, that Butler explores, and I like it a lot. But there's also this what Charles calls a moral relationship that involves contrition on the one part, forgiveness on the other. That's a real phenomenon too. The main thing is to distinguish them and ponder them.
Yeah. He's got a very rich theory about this. We didn't really get until the end into the stuff about trust and acceptance and understanding and all. So it's a really complex dynamic that Charles wants to explain, and I tend to agree with him. I guess the one thing I'm not settled about, it's still striking to me that you can't really demand forgiveness. Suppose you are contrite and you are willing to change, and can't you say to somebody, "You owe me forgiveness"? But that seems weird, doesn't it, to say to somebody, "You owe me forgiveness"?
Well, folks, you'll want to continue this conversation on Philosophy Talk, the blog. Our motto is Cogito Ergo Blogo. I think, therefore, I blog. Go to http://theblog.philosophytalk.org, or just go to our regular website and link yourself over.
And let's give the last word on forgiveness to Tracy Chapman.
Forgive me. It's all that you can say. Years gone by and still words don't come easily. Like forgive me, forgive me.
Philosophy Talk is a presentation of Ben Manila Productions and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University.
Our executive producer is Gordon Earl.
Special thanks to Dave Fasaro, Nicole Sawaya, Ben Temshin, and Alan Farley.
Support for Philosophy Talk comes from the Pacific Division of the American Philosophical Association and from various groups at Stanford University.
And even more support from the Friends of Philosophy Talk and from the members of KALW Information Radio San Francisco, where our program originates.
The views expressed or misexpressed in this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our funders.
The conversation continues on our website, www.philosophytalk.org. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.